She had learned to listen for the shifts in a room long before she learned case law. Anna Whitaker, 23, a senior splitting her time between constitutional theory and public policy seminars, felt the air tilt the moment the double doors at the back of the auditorium opened and the mayor of Chicago stepped in. Her grandfather had taught her that kind of listening. Turn down the noise, catch the current under it. He would sit beside the radio at dusk, tracking debates and elections like weather, telling her that power always announces itself, sometimes by the way a crowd inhales at once. The room inhaled now. Richard Coleman crossed the aisle with the practiced economy of a man who never needed to hurry. Cameras clicked. Faculty straightened their jackets. A student dropped a pen and didn't pick it up. He spoke for an hour without notes. His voice carried the clipped cadence of someone trained to make 12 sentences feel like one. The talk wasn't new, urban revitalization, crime reduction. A state budget shaped like a question mark, but his way of laying it out was. He bent numbers into stories and threaded stories back into policy, and each time the point returned to him like a boomerang. The student rose, leaned a little closer. He knew where to pause. He knew when to soften. He knew that a joke, if placed just so, could set a hook deeper than a statistic. Anna took it in with the hungry carefulness she brought to everything. The winter light on the stage, the city seal on the podium, the way his hands opened when he wanted to seem generous and closed when he wanted to seem firm. She told herself she was studying technique. She did not notice at first how intently she was also studying him. Afterward, the line for questions snaked down the steps. She joined it with her notebook pressed to her chest, telling herself to ask the policy question she had written in the margin 3 times and underlined twice. When her turn came, she met his eyes, and the rehearsed preface fell away. She asked about sequencing, whether the city's proposed policing reforms made sense without concurrent investments in housing and mental health, whether the order of things mattered as much as their content. It was the kind of question her grandfather loved. Build the roof first or the foundation? Coleman answered without flinching, and then he asked her one back. What would she sequence if the decision were hers? She felt the room recede to a hush and gave him a version of the argument she had been shaping for months, that people do not live in separate policy silos, and that budgets told moral stories, whether leaders admitted it or not. He smiled, not warmly so much as appraisingly, as if he had tossed a ball and liked the return. When the crowd broke, he did not leave. He stepped off the stage and moved through a knot of faculty, offered a hand to the department chair, and then kept walking until he stood a moment in front of her. Up close, he looked exactly like his photographs, and nothing like them. The same made-for-television jawline, the same precise part in his graying hair. But the eyes were cooler, the attention harder. Ms. Whitaker, he said. He had remembered her name without looking down at her note card. You asked the only question that rearranged the room. It felt like a benediction. He asked her where she was headed. She gestured vaguely at the library, at winter, at the rest of her life. He glanced toward an aide standing a discreet distance, away, then back. I'm due at a dinner downtown. Walk me to the car. Outside, campus was all breath and frost. He spoke of internships the city funded, of committees that needed young analysts with spine, of the way Chicago could break a person and make them in the same season. She kept pace, answering in full sentences because that was the only way she knew how to be brave. When the black SUV eased up to the curb, he opened the conversation she had not prepared for. Come by this evening, he said lightly, as though suggesting she stop by a bookstore. Private room at March and Oak, 7:30. Consider it an extension of office hours. She knew the restaurant, leather banquettes, low light, the kind of place where deals sign themselves. She also knew, because every article she'd read had a wife's name in it, that Richard Coleman was married. He watched her measure the distance between the fact and the invitation. You strike me, he said, as someone who understands context. The decision did not feel like a decision. It felt like a current she stepped into, and like carry her. She told herself she would ask more questions. She told herself she would keep it about policy, that she could learn something clean from someone complicated. At 7:30, she walked past the maitre d', who had been expecting her, and found him at a corner table with his jacket off and his tie loosened half an inch. A small, deliberate humanizing. He asked about her grandfather and smiled when she described the old man's ritual evenings with the radio. He said cities were living bodies and that the people who ran them needed to remember blood moved where it was allowed to. He did not touch her hand. He did not need to. Attention, perfectly tuned, can feel like a hand. By dessert, the conversation had lifted up and away from policy into the altitude where flattery thins the air. He told her she saw clearly. He told her he needed people around him who asked the kind of questions that made the room rearrange. When she stood to leave, he rose with her and said her name again, like a key he'd tested in a lock and found to fit. In the vestibule, where the night pressed against the glass, he lowered his voice by half a step, the register public men use when they intend to say something private. "You'll keep this between us," he said. It was not a question and not quite an order. It was the first stone set. After that, secrecy became a scaffolding that could be assembled and disassembled in minutes. A number from an aide who never introduced himself. Cars that arrived at the service entrance. Dinners after hours when the staff had been sent home early. She learned the choreography without being taught. He was precise with time and generous with praise. He could make an apology sound like a gift and a demand sound like concern. She told herself she was choosing, that the exhilaration she felt when his attention swung to her was not the same thing as permission. When she woke in the small hours, the glow of the city in the window, she heard her grandfather's radio in memory and could not tell whether the static in her chest was warning or weather. He never promised her anything so vulgar as a future. He promised only the next conversation, the next room, the next breath of air that other people were not allowed to draw. The city rolled forward under winter, then thawed, and the pattern repeated with a steadiness that made it feel inevitable. Somewhere between a question asked in a lecture hall and a door closing softly behind her at a private entrance, the line that separates admiration from surrender vanished. Richard Coleman, husband, mayor, candidate in waiting, had arranged the world so that a young woman's brilliance was safest when it was hidden. And Anna, bright, serious, already fluent in the language of power, stepped into the hidden place and stayed. That was how it began. Not with a vow, but with a practiced smile, a table in the corner, and a secret that fit in the palm of his hand. The first months carried the illusion of balance. Anna believed she was steering her own course, a student who happened to be seen by someone powerful, a young woman testing the edges of her independence. Richard Coleman made her feel extraordinary. He could switch from statesman to confidant in the span of a sentence. At times he was tender, watching her reactions as if they mattered more than poll numbers. He sent her books with notes in the margins, invited her into policy discussions few outside his inner circle ever heard. When he leaned close across a table and told her she had a mind sharper than half his staff, she felt lit from within. But affection was never the only note in his voice. The same mouth that praised her brilliance could twist into something cold. A late response to his call drew a sharp reminder of how many people would kill for a fraction of his time. A missed dinner became a lecture about loyalty. He wrapped his warnings in velvet, but beneath the velvet lay steel. "You don't know how dangerous it is," he would say when she questioned his secrecy. "I am protecting you." And she would nod, because to argue was to risk losing the glow of his attention. Weeks turned into months, months into years. She learned to live inside a double life. In daylight, she was Anna Whitaker, the diligent student, the daughter who phoned her parents every Sunday, who let her mother believe she was absorbed in coursework and library hours. By night, she slipped into a world curated entirely by him. There were apartments rented under false names, dinners after the last customer had gone, hotel rooms that seemed to appear out of nowhere. Each secret carried a thrill, and each thrill tightened the leash. Her grandfather noticed the changes first. He asked why she no longer attended the debates they used to watch together, why her eyes seemed older than her years. Anna deflected with vague answers about heavy coursework. She could not tell him that her evenings were filled with someone else's stories, someone else's ambitions. To confess would mean destroying the one place she felt chosen. Richard mastered the rhythm of giving and taking. When she doubted, he would soften, remind her that she was the only one who truly understood him. He would tilt her chin, whisper that he needed her in ways his wife never could. The intimacy was intoxicating, binding her to him more tightly than threats ever could. Yet the threats were there too, unspoken but unmistakable. He reminded her of the career doors he could open or close. He hinted at the ruin that might follow if rumors spread. "Chicago feeds on scandal," he would murmur, "and scandal devours women first." Anna absorbed these lessons until they felt like truths of the world. She learned when to keep her voice low, when to smile without speaking, when to leave questions hanging. The dependency crept over her quietly, disguised as devotion. Each time she considered pulling back, he found a way to convince her that leaving him meant stepping into a void. She was young, untested, alone. He was seasoned, connected, irreplaceable. Her friends noticed her disappearances. Invitations declined, birthdays missed, long silences punctuated by vague excuses. Some stopped asking. Others teased her about a secret boyfriend. And she forced a laugh while her chest tightened. The fewer questions they asked, the safer she felt, yet also more isolated. The relationship existed in shadows, and shadows became her habitat. She told herself she loved him, and in many ways she did. Love was the word she gave to the cocktail of admiration, fear, and longing that bound her. He was the man who opened doors in her mind, who challenged her intellect, who reached for her hand as though it belonged to him by right. He was also the man who watched her with a narrowed gaze when she mentioned classmates by name, who discouraged her from attending parties without him, who reminded her that privacy was survival. As semesters passed, her classmates moved on to internships, law school acceptances, campaigns where their names appeared on flyers. Anna remained tethered to a single figure, convinced that his orbit was larger than any world she could build on her own. She imagined futures where he might one day leave his marriage, where her sacrifices would be redeemed. When doubt clawed at her, he would touch her hair, lower his voice, and assure her she was his only true ally. And so the years stacked, each one laying another brick in a wall she could no longer see over. She lived for his summons, for the texts that arrived at odd hours, for the brief, blazing moments when he made her feel indispensable. At the same time, she lived in fear of his displeasure, of the invisible boundary she might cross without warning. Richard Coleman had become both anchor and storm, and Anna, naive, devoted, trembling between awe and dread, clung to him as if there were no other shore. It began with small betrayals from her own body, mornings when the smell of coffee made her gag, evenings when exhaustion swept over her so suddenly she had to lie down on the cold tile floor of her bathroom. Anna told herself it was stress, the weight of finals, and the constant pressure of keeping her life divided into parts. But as the weeks slipped by, the signs grew undeniable. She bought a test in a corner pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away, hiding it at the bottom of a paper bag as if it were contraband. The blue lines appeared almost instantly. Her hands shook so violently she had to grip the edge of the sink to keep from collapsing. For hours, she paced her apartment, whispering half-formed plans to herself. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she had read it wrong. She took another test the next day, then another, and each one confirmed what she already knew. She was pregnant, and the father was the mayor of Chicago. She avoided calling him for 2 days, hoping some miracle would undo the truth. But secrets had weight, and the longer she carried it, the heavier it pressed. When she finally told Richard, his face hardened in a way she had never seen. For the first time, his charm slipped entirely. "You're certain?" he asked, voice clipped, as if certainty were an offense. She nodded. "Yes, I'm—" He cut her off with a sharp motion. He walked to the window of the apartment he used for their meetings, staring down at the blur of city lights. When he turned back, the calculation in his expression made her stomach twist. "This changes everything," he said, "but not in the way you think." She searched his face for relief, for joy, for even the smallest flicker of shared wonder. Instead, he spoke in the measured cadence of a man drafting a contract. "Victoria and we've never had children. Doctors said it was impossible years ago. Do you know what this means? This child will be raised as ours. Publicly. Legally." The word struck like a blow. "Ours," she repeated, stunned. "You mean mine. Mine and yours." He stepped closer, his gaze like ice. "No, Anna. You're 23, a student with no career, no foundation. What would you offer this child? Scrutiny? Scandal? You think the city would allow their mayor to be dragged through the mud because of one reckless mistake?" His voice rose, each word a lash. "No, this child will be mine and Victoria's. A Coleman, legitimate, protected. That is the only way. We'll have the papers handled quietly," he added, his tone measured. "A new birth certificate filed at the private hospital. His name registered under mine and Victoria's. No one will question it. I have the right people in place." Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the edge of the couch. "You can't mean that. You can't take my baby." "I can," he replied, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "And I will." The hours that followed blurred into a nightmare of persuasion and pressure. He painted a future where she finished law school debt-free, with job offers waiting, a trust fund in her name, all in exchange for one thing: compliance. "You'll have everything you've ever dreamed of," he murmured, brushing her hair back as though tenderness could disguise the cruelty. "But the child will be raised in my house. Victoria will be his mother. You'll step away quietly and no one will ever know." She shook her head, tears blinding her. "I won't sign anything. I won't." Richard's smile was thin, almost pitying. "You think you have a choice? You don't understand how fragile your position is. One word, one leak, and your name will be dragged across every newspaper in Illinois. They'll call you a homewrecker, a gold digger. Do you want your parents to see that? Your grandfather? Do you want to destroy them too?" The room spun. Every sentence was a trap. Love twisted into threat. Promise laced with menace. He pressed a stack of papers onto the coffee table. Drafts of agreements, notarized spaces left blank. "This is for your protection as much as mine. You'll sign after delivery. Until then, you'll stay where I tell you, do as I say. You'll be cared for. I'll see to that, but don't mistake care for freedom." Anna sobbed into her hands, unable to breathe. He crouched before her, forcing her to look at him. "You'll thank me one day. This way, the child has everything. A name, a future, a legacy. Better than anything you could give on your own." The duality of him was unbearable. A man who once whispered admiration now spoke like a warden dictating a sentence. She realized with chilling clarity that he had never considered her an equal. She was a vessel, an accessory, useful until inconvenient. When he left that night, he kissed her forehead as though sealing a bargain. "Don't do anything foolish," he warned softly. "I'd hate to see you ruin yourself." The door clicked shut, leaving her in silence, so thick she could hear the hammering of her pulse. For the first time, Anna understood the full extent of his control. She was not simply a lover hidden in the shadows. She was property, and the life growing inside her had already been claimed. Richard wasted no time turning his decision into logistics. Within days of confirming the pregnancy, he presented Anna with a plan already drawn to completion. To her parents, she would be the lucky recipient of a coveted internship at a well-known public relations firm downtown. To the world, she would be a young woman focused on career prospects, taking her first steps into Chicago's political communication circuit. In truth, it was camouflage, another layer of secrecy designed to mask the life he had bound her to. The firm occupied 3 sleek floors of a glass building just off Michigan Avenue. From the outside, it looked like any other corporate office. Revolving doors, marble lobby, security badges clipped to blazers. But to Anna, it was a stage set built not for her advancement, but for her containment. Richard had arranged everything. Her placement, her stipend, even the apartment where she would live, rented under a name that wasn't hers. "No one can know," he reminded her, always the refrain. "This is for your protection." The apartment itself was comfortable but anonymous. Sparse furniture, no family photographs, utilities already paid. It smelled faintly of fresh paint, as though no one had lived there long enough to leave an imprint. When she looked out the window, she saw the glitter of downtown lights and the flow of people below, but she felt more like an exile than a resident. Every knock at the door made her chest tighten. Every phone call from her mother felt like a test of her ability to keep her voice steady, to pretend she was simply busy learning the ropes of professional life. Still, she reported to the firm each morning, forcing herself to adapt to its rhythms. The PR office buzzed with the urgency of deadlines, campaign launches, crisis management. Phones rang constantly, keyboards clattered. Voices rose and fell in quick succession. Amid the chaos, Anna discovered something she hadn't expected. The work itself stirred her. She liked drafting memos, listening in on strategy meetings, piecing together how words could move crowds. For a few hours each day, she could almost believe she belonged. It was in one of those meetings that she first noticed Matthew Carter. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, nor the most polished, but people leaned toward him when he spoke. A mid-level strategist, Matthew carried himself with an ease that contrasted sharply with Richard's calculated gravity. Where Richard's authority pressed down like weight, Matthew's influence flowed outward, steady and unforced. He noticed her on the second day, offering a quick smile as they both reached for the same file. Their paths crossed often after that. He asked about her studies, not in the perfunctory way older men did, but with genuine curiosity. When she gave her thoughts, he listened, not rushing to correct or redirect her. One afternoon, after a long session preparing a client for a televised debate, he lingered in the conference room to ask if she wanted to grab coffee. Anna hesitated. Coffee shops felt dangerously public, but something in his tone disarmed her. She agreed. At the cafe, surrounded by the hum of ordinary life, she remembered what it felt like to breathe freely. Matthew talked about his small apartment on the north side, about his younger sister finishing nursing school, about the long hours that sometimes made him wonder if PR was worth the burnout. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't guarding every word like a state secret. For the first time in years, Anna found herself laughing without fear. That night, back in the sterile apartment Richard had secured, the contrast gnawed at her. Richard was power embodied, commanding, terrifyingly certain of his control. Matthew was warmth, approachable, the kind of man who asked before assuming, who listened before declaring. She lay awake, hands pressed to the faint swell of her stomach, wondering which world was real, the one designed by Richard or the one that flickered to life in a downtown cafe with a man who looked at her as though she were simply herself. Each day the divide grew sharper. Richard's calls were directives cloaked as concern. Matthew's presence was gentle, uncalculated. One man treated her as property. The other seemed to see her as a person. And though she knew which side of the divide held her captive, Anna could not stop imagining the possibility of stepping across. At first, it was nothing more than shared lunches and lingering conversations after long days at the office. Matthew Carter had a way of making even the most crowded room feel intimate. He never rushed her, never demanded more than she could give. For Anna, those moments became small lifelines. She had lived for years in the shadow of Richard's dominance. Every interaction a calculation, every word measured against consequences. With Matthew, there was no ledger. There was simply the quiet joy of being seen. One evening, after a particularly tense client presentation, Matthew walked her out of the building. The city hummed around them, traffic lights blinking, wind tunneling between tall glass towers. He asked if she wanted dinner, and without thinking, she said yes. At the restaurant, he let her choose the table, asked what she liked before ordering, and when she spoke about her grandfather's love for political radio, he listened as though it were the most fascinating story he'd ever heard. The warmth in his eyes unnerved her, because it wasn't admiration dressed as leverage. It was interest plain and unadorned. Over the weeks, their connection deepened. He accompanied her to coffee shops, to bookstores, to quiet walks along the lakefront where the city's noise receded into the lapping of waves. He asked about her dreams, and when she admitted she wasn't sure what her future looked like anymore, he told her it didn't have to be mapped out yet. That life could be built together, step by step. His words settled into places in her chest that Richard's had scorched. Anna felt the stirrings of something she hadn't let herself hope for. Real love. With Matthew, she laughed easily without the gnawing fear of misstepping. He admired her intelligence, but didn't weaponize it. He noticed when she was tired, offering to take on extra work. He brushed her hand in passing, tentative at first, then more deliberate, until holding his hand became as natural as breathing. At night, back in the apartment Richard controlled, guilt twisted through her. The pregnancy was a secret wrapped tight inside her, hidden beneath loose sweaters and carefully chosen outfits. Each morning, she checked her reflection with dread, terrified Matthew would notice. She wanted to tell him the truth, but the words congealed in her throat. To confess meant risking the fragile sanctuary they had built. To confess meant acknowledging the shadow of Richard's power still looming over her. When Matthew finally confessed his feelings, it was not with grand theatrics, but with quiet certainty. They had stayed late at the office, papers scattered across the conference table. As they packed up, he paused, watching her with a look that stripped away all pretense. "Anna," he said, voice low, "I think I'm falling for you." Her heart lurched. For years, love had been a weapon wielded against her. Now, spoken in his voice, it sounded like shelter. She whispered his name, unable to say more, and he stepped closer, brushing her cheek as though afraid she might vanish. The relationship unfolded quickly after that. They spent weekends together, exploring neighborhoods, cooking in his small kitchen, building a rhythm of shared jokes and easy silences. Anna felt herself slipping into the life she had once believed impossible. A life where affection was not laced with threats, where man's presence did not mean constant vigilance. She began to imagine a future again, one not dictated by secrecy but by choice. Then, one late autumn evening, Matthew surprised her. They had walked to a quiet park, leaves crunching underfoot, the skyline glowing against the dusk. He stopped beneath a lamppost, pulled a small box from his pocket, and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a simple ring, elegant but unpretentious, perfectly Matthew. "I know it's soon," he admitted, eyes searching hers, "but I don't want to waste time. Anna Whitaker, will you marry me?" Tears pricked her eyes. For a moment, she let herself forget everything. The papers Richard had forced upon her, the growing secret beneath her ribs, the future that had already been written without her consent. In that instant, she saw only Matthew, kind and steady, offering her a different life. She said yes. Later that night, lying beside him, she pressed a hand over her stomach, torn between joy and dread. She told herself she could keep the secret a little longer. She told herself that if she played her part carefully, she could slip free of Richard's control, start over with Matthew, raise her child in love rather than fear. It was a fragile hope, but it was hers. For the first time in years, Anna felt as though light had broken through the shadows. And though she knew the darkness still surrounded her, she clung to the fragile flame of possibility, believing it might be enough to guide her into a new life. By late winter, concealment had become a battle Anna could no longer win. Loose sweaters and carefully draped coats had worked for a time, but her body was changing faster than excuses could cover. Every morning she stared at her reflection, tugging at fabric, trying to will herself invisible. Each day with Matthew carried the tension of waiting for his eyes to notice what her hands could not hide. She loved him, yet fear kept her silent. The breaking point came on an ordinary afternoon at a neighborhood supermarket. They had gone to pick up groceries after a long week at the firm, laughing in the fluorescent aisles as Matthew teased her for buying too many bags of tea. For a moment, it felt like the life she wanted, simple, domestic theirs. But as she reached for a carton of milk, the hem of her sweater lifted just enough. The curve of her stomach, undeniable now, pressed against the fabric. Matthew froze, his eyes locked onto her, disbelief giving way to something harder. "Anna," he said slowly, voice tight, "what is this?" Her breath caught. She tried to adjust her sweater, to summon some explanation, but the words died before forming. His gaze sharpened, filled with hurt and accusation. "You're pregnant, and you didn't tell me." She reached for him, whispering, "I was going to. When?" His voice cracked through the aisle like a whip. "When it was too late for me to walk away. When the truth couldn't be hidden anymore." Shoppers nearby glanced over, then quickly turned away, sensing the private devastation unraveling in public. Anna's hands trembled as she tried to speak. "I was afraid. I thought we could still have a life together. I thought love would be enough." He shook his head, stepping back as though distance could shield him. "Whose child is it, Anna? Tell me it's mine." Her silence was answer enough. The color drained from his face. Without another word, Matthew reached into his coat pocket, pulled out the ring she had cherished, and pressed it into her palm with brutal finality. "Keep it, or don't. It doesn't matter. We're done." She felt the world collapse in on itself as he turned and walked away, leaving her standing beneath the cold lights of the grocery store. The chatter of clerks, the squeak of carts, the hum of ordinary life went on as if nothing had happened, while inside her everything shattered. She clutched the ring, tears blurring the shelves into streaks of color. In a single moment, she had lost him. His love, their future, the fragile hope she had guarded so desperately. The days that followed blurred into grief. Anna wandered her apartment like a ghost, staring at the ring on her dresser, at the empty side of the bed where Matthew had once slept. Her chest ached with a hollowness deeper than words. She had gambled on love, on escape, and lost. It was in that vacuum of despair that Richard reappeared, as though summoned by her weakness. He arrived unannounced, immaculate in his tailored coat, carrying the chill of winter inside with him. He looked her over, gaze lingering on the visible swell of her stomach. "So," he said flatly, "it's come to this." She flinched, unable to meet his eyes. "You thought you could build a new life, didn't you?" His tone was neither mocking nor surprised, merely cold. "Naive. Did you really believe love would protect you? That a boy with kind eyes could shield you from the truth?" Anna swallowed hard, forcing herself to whisper, "He loved me." Richard's expression barely shifted. "And now he doesn't. That's the difference between boys and men, Anna. They leave when the weight grows too heavy. I don't leave. I decide." Her chest tightened. "Please, I just want to raise my child. I'll disappear. No one has to know." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room until she could scarcely breathe. "You'll do exactly what I say. You'll deliver in the hospital I choose. Quietly, efficiently. And when it's over, you'll step aside. The child will be mine and Victoria's. You'll never speak of this again." Her hands instinctively wrapped around her stomach. "He's my baby." Richard's voice dropped to a whisper colder than any shout. "He's my legacy. You are nothing without my protection. Don't forget that." Anna's tears blurred her vision, but she held her ground. Inside, however, she felt the chains tighten, the last remnants of freedom slip away. The man who had once charmed her with eloquence now stood as her captor, dictating the fate of her unborn child with absolute certainty. As he left, the door shutting with a soft, decisive click, Anna sank to the floor. The apartment seemed smaller, suffocating, every wall echoing with his control. Love was gone. Hope was gone. Only Richard remained, and with him the terrible future he had already written. Snow whipped against the windows of the hospital, carried on a wind that made the old panes rattle. It was New Year's Eve, and the maternity ward felt hollow, stripped of warmth by fluorescent lights and the fatigue of staff counting the hours until midnight. Nurses moved briskly through the hallways, voices low, their attention fixed on charts and schedules rather than the woman doubled over in a corner of the triage room. Anna Whitaker clutched her stomach, each contraction slicing through her like a blade. She tried to call out, but her voice was drowned in the mechanical hum of machines and the shuffle of tired shoes. She had arrived alone, coat soaked with melting snow, hair plastered to her temples. No one walked her in, no one held her hand. The intake nurse had looked at her swollen belly, asked for her name, then scanned the clipboard with disinterest. "We'll get you a bed when one opens," the woman said, already turning to the next task. Minutes dragged into an hour, pain building in waves that left Anna gasping. By the time a stretcher was wheeled in, she felt more like cargo than patient. The delivery room smelled of antiseptic and cold air. A nurse tied her hair back roughly, another snapped gloves onto pale hands. No one asked if she was afraid. No one asked if she wanted someone with her. They assumed silence was consent, and Anna, too weak, too terrified, let silence answer for her. The contractions came harder, each one leaving her trembling. Sweat slicked her face, but still the staff's eyes slid over her as if she were just another body passing through. Hours blurred together. She pushed when told, gasped when pain tore through her. At one point, dizziness swarmed her vision, and she realized with horror that she was bleeding more than she should. She begged for help, whispering, "Something's wrong," but the nurse only muttered, "Stay calm, it's normal," before stepping out to fetch supplies that never came. Alone, Anna felt her strength draining away, the edges of the room going dark. Then, sudden, merciless, miraculous, she heard a cry. A sharp, piercing wail split the air, raw and alive. Her son. The sound dragged her back from the brink. When the nurse finally placed the baby on her chest, Anna's tears came hot and unstoppable. She wrapped her arms around him, inhaling his warmth, his scent, the fragile weight of a life she had created. For a moment, the world receded. It was just the two of them, mother and child, bound in a love so fierce it eclipsed every shadow. She whispered promises against his soft skin, that she would protect him, that he would never feel abandoned, that her love would be louder than any silence. His tiny fist closed around her finger, and she felt a surge of strength she hadn't known she still carried. In that fragile embrace, she believed, against all odds, that hope had returned. The door opened. The illusion shattered. Richard Coleman stepped into the room, his presence sucking the air from it. Immaculate as ever, he did not look like a man arriving at midnight on a snowstorm's edge. He looked like inevitability. Two aides followed behind him, clipboards and briefcases in hand. Anna clutched her baby tighter, panic flooding her chest. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "Please, don't take him." Richard's eyes were cold, unyielding. He moved forward with calm precision, peeling the child from her arms despite her desperate grip. The newborn wailed, sensing the rupture, but Richard held him with the entitlement of a man claiming property. "He belongs with me," he said softly, almost kindly, "with my wife, with the name that will protect him." The hospital staff said nothing. Everything had already been arranged. The birth certificate bore Victoria's name as mother. Richard had orchestrated it all. Discreet signatures, sealed files, legal shadows. Anna sobbed, reaching out, but her arms closed on air. She begged, pleaded that he let her keep even one night, 1 hour. He ignored her, passing the child to the aide who held him as though handling evidence, not life. On the bedside table, a stack of documents appeared, thick with legal jargon. "Sign," Richard ordered. His voice was smooth but iron-hard. "It formalizes what we already agreed. You walk away with protection, anonymity, security. The boy grows up safe. Everyone wins." Her hand shook as the pen was pressed between her fingers. The words on the page blurred through her tears. She felt as though she were watching from outside her own body, watching a young woman forced to sever the deepest bond before it had even begun. Still, she signed, each stroke of ink carving a wound she knew would never heal. When it was done, Richard nodded. The aides packed the papers, efficient, rehearsed. One of the aides stepped forward and handed Richard a stamped form, an affidavit of parental acknowledgement already notarized and filed. The legal machinery had been running long before Anna stepped into the room. Then a man she had never seen before stepped forward, placing an envelope on the bedside table. It was thick, heavy with cash. He spoke for the first time, his tone as flat as his expression. "This is to ensure your cooperation. You will not speak of this to anyone." Anna stared at the envelope as though it were poison. Hush money. Payment for silence. Payment for erasing herself. She pushed it away with trembling fingers, but the man only tucked it into her bag. "It's yours," he said, "whether you like it or not." The room emptied as quickly as it had filled. Richard gave her one last look, not of triumph, but of cold finality. Then he left, taking her son with him. The door closed, and the sound of her baby's cries faded down the corridor until only silence remained. Anna lay back against the thin pillow, body weak from blood loss, soul hollowed by grief. The clock struck midnight, fireworks bursting faintly in the distance to welcome a new year. In that sterile room, she felt only endings. Her arms, once full, were empty. Her heart, once lit with hope, was shattered beyond repair. All that remained was the echo of her child's first cry, and the knowledge that it had been stolen from her before she could even whisper his name. The weeks after the birth blurred into a haze of exhaustion and grief. Anna remained in the hospital longer than expected, her body slow to recover from the trauma of labor and the blood loss that had nearly taken her life. Nurses came and went with clipped efficiency, their footsteps echoing against sterile linoleum floors. Doctors spoke in careful tones, but their words carried the finality of a sentence handed down. One morning, a gray-haired obstetrician sat by her bed with a chart in his lap. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but the news hollowed her out. The complications were severe. Scar tissue has formed. "I'm afraid you won't be able to carry another pregnancy." He paused, searching her face. "I'm sorry." Anna stared at him, unblinking. She had lost her son to Richard's control, and now she was losing every chance of ever holding another child. It was not just grief that consumed her. It was annihilation, as though an entire future had been stripped away in one unrelenting sweep. She nodded mechanically because that was what was expected, but inside something cracked so deeply she feared it could never be mended. When she was discharged, the world outside felt unreal. Snow still clung to the sidewalks. Taxis honked through slush. People hurried with shopping bags for belated holiday sales. Life had not paused to notice her collapse. She returned to the anonymous apartment Richard had chosen for her, its walls bare, its air heavy with silence. Days passed with her curtains drawn. She stopped answering calls from her parents, unable to weave the lies required to sound normal. Food lost its taste. Sleep brought no rest. Only dreams of her son's cry fading down a hallway. The envelope of cash sat on her dresser like a curse. Thick, heavy, obscene. Richard's version of closure. At first, she couldn't bring herself to touch it, revolted by the idea that her pain could be measured in bills. Yet each time she passed it, its presence gnawed at her, a reminder of the price of silence. Finally, one frigid morning, she stuffed it into a bag and left the apartment. She walked to a community center she had once passed on her commute, a place that provided hot meals, clothing, and tutoring for families scraping by. She left the envelope on the director's desk without explanation. "Use it for the children," she whispered before walking out. It didn't cleanse her. The money still felt like poison under her skin. But giving it away spared her from becoming complicit in Richard's transaction. She could not keep his hush money, not when every dollar was stained with the theft of her child. Still, the act did not erase the despair that followed her everywhere. Anna drifted through the weeks like a ghost. She avoided mirrors, unable to face the hollow-eyed stranger reflected back. Friends who reached out received vague excuses until they stopped asking. She walked the city at odd hours, blending into crowds, her mind trapped in a loop of what-ifs and might-have-beens. Depression wrapped around her like fog, dimming every color. She thought often of her grandfather, of the evenings they once spent dissecting debates and discussing integrity in politics. Would he recognize her now? Would he forgive her for choices that had led to such ruin? Each memory was a knife, but also a tether to the person she had once been. Idealistic, hopeful, convinced she could make a difference. Somewhere in the fog, the smallest ember of defiance survived. Perhaps it was born from the rejection of Richard's money, or from the flicker of memory of the baby she had held for those few precious seconds. She could not undo what had been stolen from her, but she could decide what remained. Anna resolved to build again, even if her hands trembled. She returned to her studies, sitting in the back of lecture halls, forcing herself to take notes through the blur of tears. She applied for small research projects, keeping her head down, reminding herself she was still capable of work, of thought, of something beyond grief. Each step was tiny, but it was movement, and movement was the only antidote to paralysis. Yet, no matter how determined she tried to be, the pain lingered like a shadow she could not outrun. The loss was twofold, her child and the possibility of all children to come. Every laugh she heard from a stroller on the street cut into her. Every lullaby drifting from an open window reminded her of the promises she had whispered and broken. She lived, but she lived with a wound that would not close. The world expected healing with time, but time only deepened her awareness of what was gone. The best she could do was keep moving, carrying the invisible weight, determined to survive even when joy seemed impossible. Her life had been shattered, but she was still here, breathing in a city that had stolen so much and demanding, quietly, the right to exist. A year slipped by, each month carrying Anna farther from the sterile hospital room, but never from the sound of her son's fading cry. She forced herself to function, completing coursework, keeping her head low, avoiding anything that might stir whispers. Outwardly she appeared composed, but inside she was fractured, stitched together by sheer will. It was during this fragile stage that she met David Miller. David was kind in a quiet, unremarkable way. He was a mid-level accountant at a firm on the north side, the sort of man colleagues described as reliable. He noticed her at a community lecture, struck up conversation afterward, and soon they were meeting for coffee. Anna found his gentleness soothing, a balm against the wounds left by Richard's cruelty and Matthew's departure. He never pushed, never pried into the locked rooms of her past. When he suggested marriage months later, she said yes, not out of passion, but out of a deep hunger for stability, for the illusion of a family to replace the one she had lost. The wedding was modest, a small gathering at a rented hall with muted flowers and polite smiles. Anna wore white, but her heart did not quicken. She walked down the aisle as though performing a role, determined to convince herself that commitment could grow into love. David looked at her with steady affection, and she clung to that steadiness like a raft. Married life, however, revealed cracks quickly. David's mother, a sharp-tongued woman named Margaret, was a constant presence. She compared Anna to David's ex-wife at every opportunity, praising the woman's warmth, her homemaking skills, her natural grace. Each comparison was a knife Anna learned to endure in silence. She kept house meticulously, cooked carefully, dressed neatly, all in the hope of quieting Margaret's disdain. Nothing worked. Worse still, Anna carried her own secret, the doctor's verdict that she would never have children. She could not bring herself to tell David. In the early months of their marriage, she offered excuses, stress, timing, the need to wait until they were more financially stable. He nodded, accepting her words without suspicion, but each conversation tightened the knot of guilt in her chest. She lived with the terror that one day he would demand answers she could not give. The house they shared felt orderly but lifeless. Meals were eaten in silence, punctuated by polite questions about each other's days. Intimacy was mechanical, void of spark. At night, Anna lay awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of the child she had once held for a breath before he was taken. The emptiness inside her body echoed in the emptiness of the marriage. One evening, while clearing dishes after dinner at Margaret's home, Anna paused in the hallway as voices drifted from the living room. She hadn't meant to listen, but the words froze her in place. "She's not like Emily," Margaret said, her tone dripping with disdain. "You two had such chemistry, such promise. And now she's expecting again, isn't she?" Anna's stomach turned to ice. David's voice followed, low but unmistakable. "Yes, she told me last week. I'm helping as much as I can." The clatter of plates nearly gave her away. She pressed a hand to her mouth, heart pounding, ears straining to make sure she hadn't misheard. Expecting again. Emily, his ex-wife. He hadn't severed ties at all. He was still entangled, still giving parts of himself away. Anna's knees threatened to buckle. She retreated quietly, her mind reeling. The marriage she had clung to as a second chance was nothing more than a facade, a placeholder for a man who had never let go of his past. And the cruelest irony of all, his former wife carried the very life Anna could never give him. That night, as David drove them home, she sat in silence, staring out at the blur of streetlights. His voice droned on about mundane matters, but she no longer heard him. Inside her, something shifted. The fragile hope she had tried to patch together was gone, ripped away as surely as her son had been. She had entered this marriage seeking refuge, but it had become another cage, one built not of power like Richard's, but of absence, of secrets and comparisons and betrayal. By the time they pulled into the driveway, Anna knew she had no place here, not as a wife, not as a partner, not as a future, only as a shadow clinging to someone else's life. Anna packed quietly, careful not to wake David as he snored faintly in the next room. She folded her few clothes into a single suitcase, slipped her wedding ring onto the dresser, and left the keys on the kitchen counter. There was no confrontation, no farewell. The marriage had already hollowed itself out. All that remained was the formality of leaving. By dawn she was gone, the small house shrinking in her rearview mirror as if it had never belonged to her at all. The days that followed were restless, each one swallowed by a growing obsession. She could not erase the image of her son, the infant torn from her arms on that frigid New Year's Eve. He would be nearly a year old now, walking perhaps, babbling, reaching for the people around him. Each night she lay awake, wondering if he laughed, if he cried, if anyone soothed him. The ache grew unbearable. Finally, desperation carved a path she had long resisted. She would go to Richard's house. She would see her child, even if only for a moment. The Coleman estate sat on a quiet street lined with bare trees and iron gates. Snow crunched under Anna's boots as she climbed the steps, her heart hammering. She rang the bell, clutching the strap of her bag to keep her hands from shaking. The door creaked open, but it wasn't Richard who appeared. Victoria Coleman stood in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe that hung too loosely on her frame. Once the picture of wealth and elegance, she now looked worn, her face gaunt, her eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. Her gaze sharpened as it landed on Anna, recognition flashing like a blade. "You," Victoria hissed, her voice hoarse. "I should have known you'd crawl back." Anna swallowed hard, summoning the courage to speak. "I need to see him. My son." Victoria laughed, bitter and low. "Your son? Don't flatter yourself. He is mine and Richard's. That's what the world believes, and that's what he will believe too." She leaned against the doorframe, lips curling. "Do you think a bastard child could survive in this family otherwise?" Anna's chest tightened, but she stood firm. "You don't love him. You don't even want him. I can see it in your face." Victoria's eyes flickered with something raw before hardening again. "Want him? No. He is a constant reminder of Richard's betrayal, of my failure, of the farce we call a marriage. Every cry pierces like a needle. Every smile feels like mockery. He is not a blessing. He is a curse in a crib." The venom in her voice stunned Anna, but beneath it she heard truth. The child she had longed for was not cherished here. He was tolerated, resented, caught in a war he had never asked to fight. Anna's voice trembled. "Then let me take him. Let me love him the way you cannot." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Victoria's mouth twisted into a grim smile. "You think Richard would allow that? He parades the boy as proof of his virility, his legacy. Do you know what it would do to his image if people knew the truth? You're not just irrelevant, Anna. You're dangerous. That's why he'll never let you near." Tears burned Anna's eyes. She reached for the doorframe, steadying herself. "All I wanted was to be his mother. That was stolen from me." Victoria's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "Do you think I don't know what it feels like to be hollowed out by him? He used me too, paraded me when it suited him, discarded me when it didn't. We're both prisoners, you and I. The only difference is that I've accepted my chains." The words landed heavy, heavier than any insult. For the first time, Anna saw Victoria not as an enemy, but as another casualty. Wealth, status, marriage, it had not spared her. The bitterness had consumed her, leaving behind only a brittle shell. Anna stepped back, heart aching with the futility of it all. She would not see her son. She would not break through the fortress Richard had built around him. But she left with something else, the clarity that her pain was not hers alone. Richard's empire was built on control and deception, and everyone within its walls paid a price. As she walked away from the estate, snow falling softly against her coat, Anna felt the weight of her loss pressing on every step. She had been stripped of love, of motherhood, of the illusions she had clung to. Yet she was still walking. She was still breathing. Survival, she realized, was its own kind of defiance. The night closed around her, and with it came a bitter peace. She would never reclaim what had been stolen, but she could carry the truth. The power corrupts, the betrayal corrodes even those who wield it, and that endurance, quiet, relentless, was the only justice left to her. Anna Whitaker had been broken, but she had not disappeared. And in a world that thrived on erasing women like her, that survival was a verdict in itself. I didn't expect to see her. Not there. Not like that. The glass doors of Orion Logic hissed shut behind me as I stepped onto the polished floor of the 14th level. Everything smelled like eucalyptus and filtered ambition. Clean, efficient, and different. I had been practicing this moment for weeks. My resume was freshly printed, pressed flat inside a cobalt blue folder. The heels I wore were scuffed, yes, but polished. My coat too thin for a Minnesota March morning. But I smiled anyway, the way you smile when you've convinced yourself that preparation can outshine legacy. The receptionist had barely acknowledged me as she handed over the temporary badge. "Assessment room C," she muttered, pointing down a hallway that felt longer than it should have. I nodded and thanked her softly, maybe too softly. My voice never sounded the right volume in places like this. As I walked past the glass panels, I caught glimpses of the candidates already inside. Sharp suits, sleek hair, laughter that echoed in short bursts. I straightened my spine, forced my breath to slow. One of them looked up, then away. I took the only empty seat, a little too far from the center of the circle. Just close enough to be tolerated, not quite close enough to matter. Then the door clicked. My fingers froze on the folder in my lap. She entered with the unmistakable rhythm of someone who believed every room owed her its silence. Navy blouse tucked into slate gray trousers. Hair in a bun so tight it looked like a sculpture. A gold name tag gleamed beneath her collarbone. Aubrey Whitmore, Director, Systems Innovation. My sister. She didn't blink when our eyes met. No hesitation. No flicker of acknowledgement. She just walked to the far end of the table, set her travel mug down, a brushed steel thermos that probably cost more than my weekly groceries, and took her seat as if I didn't exist. My breath caught, but I didn't let it break. Not yet. I remembered the last time I'd seen her, at a dinner for my mother's birthday. Aubrey had shown up 40 minutes late and still managed to take over the conversation in 5. She'd toasted to family resilience while smiling straight at me, knowing damn well I'd just lost a freelance contract she'd accidentally undercut. That night, she wore the same perfume she was wearing now, sharp floral, expensive. The HR coordinator began to speak. Introductions, expectations, something about agility and innovation pipelines, but the words slid past me like water. My focus narrowed to the way Aubrey tapped her pen against the table. 3 short clicks, then a pause. The same pattern she'd used when we shared a room as children, and she'd try to drive me mad while pretending to study. I was no longer 12, but I felt 12. Small, invisible, sitting in a circle of strangers, while the one person who knew me best worked her magic on them before I even spoke. "Coffee, anyone?" An assistant asked, holding a tray. It made its rounds. Every person took a cup, except me. The tray passed, and my hand stayed empty. I said nothing. Then I saw it, the smirk curling at the corner of Aubrey's mouth as she leaned toward the woman beside her. She whispered something behind her mug, and the woman let out a soft, practiced laugh. "She still dresses like she shops in college clearance bins," Aubrey said, just loud enough to sting. My face didn't move. My eyes stayed on the wood grain table, but something inside me folded into itself. I inhaled slowly, then exhaled. This wasn't about coffee, or clothes, or even the job. It was about erasure, again. And what I didn't know then, but would come to realize in the hours that followed, was that this wasn't just another failed interview. It was the last time I would ever ask for permission to be seen. They began calling names. One by one, the candidates rose, clean silhouettes in expensive tailoring, voices smooth with years of being told they belonged. As they spoke, buzzwords floated like perfume: scalable frameworks, cross-functional leadership, agile deployment. Aubrey nodded at each one, scribbling notes with the same red pen that had once corrected my science homework with ruthless delight. When my name was called, Lana Cross, she didn't even glance up. I rose anyway. My folder felt heavier than before, but my steps were even. I placed the resume at the center of the table, right in front of her. She picked it up like it was a napkin someone had left behind, flipped through it for exactly 3 seconds, then passed it to the man on her left, Miles Kenner, VP of Product. He glanced at it, blinked once, then set it aside. That was it. No questions, no reaction, no interest. I returned to my chair. The room went on. Someone behind me coughed. I stared at the grain of the table again. Aubrey's perfume seemed stronger now, like a warning, or a verdict. Then I heard it, a voice, low but not careful, from behind me. "She's here?" Didn't think she was even in tech anymore. And then Aubrey laughed. Not loud, but real and sharp. It sliced right through me. I didn't flinch. I didn't give her the satisfaction. But something inside me, something small and tired, curled tighter. like it had been bracing for this exact impact all along. I adjusted the folder in my lap and remembered the hours I spent at 2 a.m. on a borrowed laptop teaching myself data architecture while my ex-boyfriend called it a cute little phase. The time Aubrey forwarded my portfolio to the wrong client on my birthday. And the month after, when my bank balance hit double digits and my father joked, "Well, Lana's always been the artistic one. That's code for unemployed, right?" I was done pretending any of this didn't hurt. The final candidate had just sat down when Miles leaned back in his chair and pointed his pen lazily in my direction. "So," he said, like he was addressing someone's niece at Thanksgiving, "what makes you think you're ready for the big leagues?" The smirk told me this wasn't curiosity. This was sport. I opened my mouth to answer, but Aubrey moved faster. She reached across the table and snatched my resume again, clicked her pen, the red one, and began to write. From where I sat, I could see the strokes. Wrong major, wrong look, wrong fit. Then, at the very bottom, in a sharp block of crimson ink, unqualified. She didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to. She slid the paper across the polished table like she was laying down a piece of evidence, a sentence, a prophecy. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for it. I just sat there, feeling the heat rise up the back of my neck. I cleared my throat. "I led an AI ethics redesign for 3 mid-tier platforms last year," I said, voice steady, "and scaled a predictive system that cut client processing times by 34%. That framework is currently—" Aubrey cut in with a syrupy chuckle. "Still chasing those little dream projects," she said, looking past me. While I was presenting at a summit in London, she was still uploading resumes on Indeed. There were snickers now, quiet but unmistakable. One came from Nina Patel, HR, another from the assistant who'd ignored me earlier. It was happening again, but I didn't shrink. Instead, I looked at her, not at the director of innovation, not at the polished, flawless, boardroom version of my sister, but at Aubrey, the girl who used to read my journal aloud to her friends for fun, the one who told me I wasn't pretty enough for high school elections or clever enough for debate team, the sister who needed me invisible so she could shine undisturbed. And I realized something. She didn't dismiss me because I was unqualified. She dismissed me because I had finally stopped needing her to approve me. I turned away, not in defeat, but because I already knew the real answer to Miles's question. What makes me think I'm ready? Simple. I stopped waiting for rooms like this to tell me so. By the time the session ended, no one looked my way. Not even the assistant, who'd snickered. Not Nina, who had scribbled her notes without once meeting my eyes. And certainly not Aubrey, who now sipped from her mug like it held victory in ceramic form. The silence wasn't cruel. It was calculated, polished, just like them. I stood, gathered my things, and left the room as quietly as I had entered. No one stopped me. No one called out, not even to say goodbye. The building's air changed once I hit the elevator. It smelled less like performance and more like recycled air and janitorial wax. I pressed the button for the lobby and watched my reflection blur in the stainless steel walls. I didn't cry. I just walked, out through the rotating doors, into the Minneapolis wind, sharp, gray, mid-March, unforgiving. My blazer flapped open. I didn't fix it. My heels echoed along 3rd Street like I belonged somewhere else, though I no longer knew where that was. 2 blocks later, I ducked into North Loop Bean House, a place that always smelled like burned espresso and broken deadlines. It was mostly empty, except for a grad student with 3 laptops and a barista who didn't lift his head when I ordered. "Just a drip," I said. "To go. Medium." I didn't drink it. I just needed a reason to sit at the far table by the window, the one with the chipped edge and the view of the crosswalk. I slid into the seat, took a breath, and pulled the resume folder from my bag. It was still warm from my lap. The red ink stared back at me, bleeding through the back cover like a slow leak, like it had been waiting for me to admit something. Unqualified. The word sat there like a bruise, one I'd seen before. And just like that, I was back in 2016, sitting on the floor of my old apartment in St. Paul, my legs numb, a takeout box half-eaten beside me. I'd just finished a 6-week freelance job for a nonprofit, my first big pitch deck built from scratch. It had taken everything I had. I'd been proud of it. I showed it to Aubrey one night over wine. She was working for a boutique tech consultancy then. She had said, "This is cute. You always have such creative little ideas." I didn't think much of it until her firm released a nearly identical proposal a month later, presented at a conference with her name at the top. She hadn't stolen it. Not directly. That was the brilliance. "I didn't say it was mine," she'd told me at Mom's birthday dinner. "But if people connect the dots, that's not my fault." That job had gone to someone else, a man Aubrey had recommended. And I spent weeks trying to explain to confused executives why my concept had already been launched without me. I remembered the sound of my father laughing that night, glass raised. "To my daughters! Aubrey, the visionary, and Lana, the kind one." Kind. It had stuck to me like a participation ribbon. The word you give women when you don't want to say they failed. Back in the cafe, I blinked hard. The present came back in fragments. The clatter of the espresso machine, the rumble of tires over slush outside, the faint hum of a Spotify playlist built for rainy days. My phone buzzed. A new email. From Elias Everhart. Subject, "How did it go?" I stared at the screen. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard. I started to type. It went exactly the way she wanted it to. Then I paused, erased it, and wrote one word instead. Fine. I didn't owe anyone the play-by-play. Not anymore. I set the phone down and reached for the folder again. Red ink. Crumpled corners. I wasn't going to frame it. I wasn't going to keep it. But I wasn't throwing it away either. Not yet. Because I had a decision to make. One I'd been postponing for years. And I was tired of postponing. I stood slowly, slipping the folder back into my bag like I was tucking away a wound that hadn't finished bleeding. The coffee was still full. Cold. Forgotten. I left it there. The barista didn't notice me leave, and I didn't need him to. The March wind slapped my face as I stepped outside again, but this time I welcomed it. It cleared the fog behind my eyes, reminded me that shame is only permanent if you let it settle into your bones. I didn't walk home. I turned around. 2 blocks. 7 red lights. One voice in my head, repeating, "You're not finished." The receptionist blinked when I re-entered the lobby of Orion Logic. "Miss Cross," she said, standing. "Is everything all right?" I buttoned my blazer. Slowly, calmly, like armor. "I'm here for the open assessment round," I said. She hesitated. Her eyes searched my face, as if looking for a crack in my conviction. Then she picked up the phone. "Please hold." I waited in silence, my hand steady against the marble counter. Behind me, the digital directory glowed with names that didn't belong to people like me. Not yet. After a pause, she hung up the phone and nodded. "You may go up." The elevator took longer this time, or maybe I just had more thoughts between floors. By the time the doors opened again on the 14th, the tension hit me like static in the air before a storm. The glass walls of the conference room came into view. So did the panel. They were still seated, Miles, Nina, Jordan, and Aubrey. She was laughing again, a low, amused chuckle mid-conversation with Miles. Until she saw me. Her face didn't fall. Not quite. She smirked. "Changed your mind?" she asked, the words laced with silk. "You never were good at letting go." I didn't answer. I walked to the same chair I hadn't been offered earlier, pulled it out myself, sat down. Greg glanced at the others, then leaned back with exaggerated curiosity. "Well then, since you're so eager to be here, how about we put that brain to use?" He signaled to the assistant. A thick test packet landed in front of me with a heavy thud. "Paper," he said. "Not digital. No calculators. No questions. You have 15 minutes. Starting now. I nodded once, picked up the pen, and began. The questions came at me like a wall of static, logic chains, systems optimization, data reconstruction under constraint. I didn't hesitate, not because it was easy, but because I knew what it meant to be underestimated. I knew how to work with silence. I'd built a career in the spaces. No one bothered to look. Somewhere behind me, someone sipped coffee. Aubrey's chair creaked. She leaned toward Nina and muttered, "Let's see if her little sociology-adjacent AI hobby gets her anywhere now." I didn't flinch. I didn't look up. When I finished the final question, my wrist was aching. My breath came sharp, but there were no crossed-out answers. No smudges. Just precision. I pushed the packet across the table. Greg didn't even fake politeness. He flipped through the first few pages, unimpressed, like he was reviewing an amateur screenplay. Then, slowly, theatrically, he tore the entire packet in half. The sound, paper ripping, was louder than any voice in that room. The room froze. The pieces fluttered into the trash can beside him like broken wings. "Impressive penmanship," he muttered, "but we don't hire fiction writers." Someone behind me snorted. I didn't look to see who. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap. My spine didn't bend. Aubrey tilted her head. "You always were stubborn," she said softly. "Never learned when to quit." I rose, walked to the trash can, and knelt. One by one, I picked up the torn pages, not to salvage them, not for proof, but because I wanted to remember this exact moment. The feel of the answers they didn't read. The weight of a silence weaponized. As I reached for the final page, a pointed heel kicked it away, pinning it under a chair leg. Aubrey leaned forward, her voice a whisper that still sliced through the air, still crawling for approval. I looked up at her and smiled, not because I was okay, but because I was no longer asking. By the time I stepped out of that room again, the air had changed. Not outside, Minneapolis was still bleak and gray, but inside me, something had clicked into place. Not confidence, exactly. Something colder, cleaner. The soft parts had burned away. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I walked the block and a half to a printing center tucked between a parking ramp and a boarded-up bakery. It took 15 minutes to run the files, reprint the evidence. My name was on every page, metadata intact. Server logs, design blueprints, collaboration chains, proof of what I had built and how much they had ignored. By 11 a.m., I was back in the Orion Logic lobby. The receptionist looked up, startled for the third time. "I need to speak to the panel again," I said, voice low but firm. "Now." "They're in a closed session," she started, then caught my eye. She didn't finish her sentence. She just nodded and reached for the phone. Within minutes, I was being escorted back upstairs. No badge this time. No greeting. Just the cold click of my heels and the thud of my heart. The conference room looked exactly the same, but the energy had shifted. You could feel it. Thin smiles, tightened jaws. Even Miles tapped his pen a little too fast. Aubrey didn't bother to hide her smirk. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" she said, folding her arms. I stepped forward. "I'm not here to beg," I said. "I came because you left something out." Laura, one of the HR reps, narrowed her eyes. "What exactly?" "My record. My work. The things that actually matter." I placed the folder on the table and opened it, sliding the documents forward without looking at anyone directly. "You're interrupting a confidential review," Miles began. But then the door behind me opened. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I felt the shift before I heard the reaction. Chairs scooting back, feet shuffling, voices cutting off mid-sentence. Graham Everhart stepped into the room like a quiet force of gravity. He wore black, no tie, sharp as a shadow, calm as a man who had nothing to prove. Everyone stood, even Aubrey. Her voice cracked before her face did. "Mr. Everhart, I mean." "Graham?" "Wait, Coulter." But Graham didn't look at her. He looked at me. He touched the center of my back, lightly, just enough for me to feel it. "You okay?" he asked, only loud enough for me to hear. "Only me," I said softly. Then he turned to the panel. "You all seem to know me very well," he said, scanning the room with eyes like mirrors. Greg cleared his throat. "Sir, if we'd known she was qualified." Graham cut in. "Or human." He moved to the head of the table and began to lay out the documents I'd just placed, page by page, metric by metric. Lana Cross, freelance architect on 3 of our internal compliance systems, co-authored the ethics framework for our AI risk module in 2021, the same one some of you still struggle to explain to clients. The color drained from Greg's face. Laura leaned in. Miles went very, very still. Graham slid one photo across the table. This is the metrics report you used last quarter. Her work. Not signed, but hers. He turned to me. "Anything you'd like to add?" I looked around the room, at the faces that had dismissed me, at Aubrey, whose lips had parted just slightly, like a punchline had died on her tongue. "I wasn't here to ask for a favor," I said. "I showed up because I believed I had value." Then I nodded toward the table. "Turns out I had more than that. I had proof. You just didn't bother to see it." Aubrey opened her mouth, but this time nothing came out. Graham's voice dropped into something colder than steel. "I believe this warrants a formal review of interview practices, compliance, conduct." Greg stammered. "It was informal, exploratory, not binding." "Oh." Graham said almost pleasantly, "Then you won't mind if we play back the footage." He gestured to the mounted screen on the wall. The remote sat in front of him. No one moved. No one even pretended to object. The screen flickered, and the silence that filled the room as the video began wasn't just uncomfortable. It was damning. The screen flickered, then stabilized. There I was, frozen in digital clarity, standing at the center of the conference room, placing my resume in front of Aubrey. The camera caught everything. The dismissive flick of her wrist, the way she passed it like a discarded menu, the tight smirk she gave Miles, then her voice, clear as crystal in the audio feed. She still dresses like she shops in college clearance bins. A quiet gasp escaped from someone in the room. Maybe Laura. Maybe the legal rep on Zoom. No one said a word. The footage continued. Aubrey interrupting my credentials. Greg flipping through my test packet like he was looking for a joke. Then, frame by frame, the moment he tore it in half, the audible rip echoing in the speakers like judgment carved into wood. And then the whisper. "You'll always be beneath me, darling. You know that, right?" It hit like a gavel. The air collapsed. The tension in the room was a living thing now, pressing against every wall, every shoulder. No one could look away. Not even Aubrey. Her face had gone pale, lips drawn, eyes darting toward every corner but mine. The video ended in silence. Even the hum of the ventilation sounded like a verdict. Then a voice broke through. Flat, steady, from the far end of the table. "This isn't just bad judgment," said the legal advisor. "This is a liability. HR and compliance need to be looped in today." Greg opened his mouth, as if to salvage something, his image, perhaps, but Aubrey beat him to it. "She planned this," she snapped, her voice cracking into a shout. "She wanted it all on record." Heads turned. Even the assistant looked up. "This was calculated," Aubrey hissed. "Manipulation. She manipulated all of you." Her voice pitched too high, too fast. I said nothing. That silence, it rattled her more than any retort I could have delivered. She pointed straight at me like I was a virus. "I introduced you to him," she barked. "To Graham. I brought you into this room. And now you're acting like I'm the villain." I raised an eyebrow. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet. "Final. Yes," I said. "You introduced me to him. And when he chose me, You made sure no one else did. Gasps again. Graham turned to her, slowly, as if giving her one last exit. You admit you interfered with her employment? He asked, his voice low and sharp. I was protecting the company, she shot back. You don't understand. She clung to me for years. She only got here because of me. The only nepotism here, I said, eyes still on her, was you protecting yourself from ever being compared to someone you never thought would rise. Laura quietly slid her notepad away from her. Greg looked at the table. No one spoke up for Aubrey. No one even moved. Aubrey's voice dropped into a murmur, almost to herself now. I wasn't trying to destroy you. No, I replied without blinking. You were trying to erase me. And still she didn't stop. She lunged again, this time toward the edge of the table, grabbing her phone and slamming it down. She's not innocent, she shouted. Look at this. This is what she sent to a client last year, called her a walking disaster in heels. On screen, a fabricated email. My name, my signature, even my company tag. Except, I already knew about it. I calmly reached into my bag, pulled out a small black binder, and slid it forward to the legal team. That email, I said evenly, originated from her IP address, logged in under her temporary admin pass from 2 nights ago. Here's the server log. Dead silence. No shock now. Just confirmation. Graham didn't blink. He looked at Aubrey. Forging internal credentials to defame a team member is more than unethical, he said. You'll be hearing from legal. Effective immediately, you are dismissed. Aubrey's jaw clenched. Her face flushed red. Security entered, silent, swift. And yet, before she left, she tried one last time. You think you're better than me now, she hissed, her voice cracking. Just because he picked you? I looked at her directly, and for the first time in over a decade, I didn't feel small. No, I said. I'm just done being beneath you. Security didn't drag her. They didn't have to, because the room was already done with her. And for once, so was I. When the door closed behind her, it wasn't a bang. It was a hush, the kind that follows truth when it's finally spoken aloud. Graham stood motionless for a second longer, his fingers resting lightly on the closed binder. Then he turned back to the room, now quiet, now watching. I move that we reinstate Lana Cross, he said simply. Effective immediately. Full time. With project lead authority. His tone wasn't emotional. It wasn't proud. It was policy, and that made it even more powerful. All in favor. Laura's hand went up first, almost like reflex. Then Miles. Then Jordan. Then the legal advisor. Then the assistant, who hadn't even looked at me 2 hours ago. Every hand rose. No one objected. Nina, the HR rep, cleared her throat and stood. You're being offered lead strategy consultant for the ethics compliance wing, she said, her voice more composed now. The role was previously occupied by, she didn't finish. My eyes flicked toward the corner glass office, the one overlooking the city skyline. Aubrey's old throne. Nina gestured slightly. It's yours. I didn't hesitate. No, I said. I'd like a desk near the development floor, closer to the team. A pause, then a few nods. Surprised, maybe impressed. Graham's eyes met mine, and he smiled, not the public kind, the quiet kind that says I see you. I stepped forward, reached for the contract, and signed my name in ink that didn't shake. Just before I stepped away, Laura slid a small folded note toward me across the table. I hesitated, then opened it. In her soft handwriting, it read, We're glad you're finally where you've always belonged. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just smiled and walked out, this time with my head high and my name intact. The elevator down felt different, lighter, not because the fight was over, but because I wasn't carrying doubt anymore. That weight, it had belonged to her, to years of being gaslit, belittled, repackaged as support. I wasn't fragile. I was forged. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. It wasn't warm, but it was enough. I walked 3 blocks before realizing I was still holding the torn test packet in my hand. I stopped in front of a quiet bookstore, stepped under the awning, and opened my bag. Inside was a thin roll of clear tape. I hadn't known why I brought it until that moment. I sat on the edge of the planter and began to tape the pieces back together, not to repair it, but to remember it. Every rip, every stroke of red ink, every attempt to erase me. When I returned to the office later that afternoon, my office now modest, sunlit, tucked between the UX team and back-end devs, I pinned the paper to the corkboard beside my desk. It looked like a scar, and that felt right, because scars aren't shame. They're receipts. Proof you paid the price. Proof you survived. My phone buzzed. A message from Dad. I didn't see everything before. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen for a full minute, then locked it and set it down. Not out of spite, just clarity, because I didn't owe him a reply. And he didn't get to rewrite the story just because I finally stood up in it. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Productive, steady mine. No whispers, no smirks, no waiting to be seen. Just the sound of keyboards, the click of shared files, and the gentle hum of a team rebuilding something real. By mid-afternoon, I was unpacking the last of my things into the shallow drawers of my new desk. A ceramic pencil holder, a tiny brass bird from my mother years ago, the photo of my dog, long gone now, but always with me in the corner of my frame. And, of course, taped to the corkboard beside my new access badge, the resume they once folded in half. The red ink still bled faintly through the paper, like a ghost refusing to fade. I didn't cover it. I didn't hide it, because that resume wasn't just a document anymore. It was the receipt for every lesson I had paid for in silence. A knock at the door broke my thoughts. She stood in the hallway, nervous, uncertain, barely older than 23, clutching a resume so tightly to her chest it was already wrinkled at the corners. I remembered her from the glass wall, the way her eyes had followed the manager without recognition, the way they had landed on me like a lifeline. Now here she was, called back, just like I'd told her she would be. They said I could meet the project lead, she said breathlessly. That it's you. I smiled. It wasn't triumphant. It was peaceful. Yes. Come in, I said, waving her to the chair across from me. She stepped forward, careful, shoulders tense like she was waiting for the floor to open beneath her. I recognized the posture, because I had worn it like armor for years. I don't know if I'm qualified, she blurted out. That sentence landed differently now. So differently. I looked her in the eye. You showed up, I said. You kept showing up. That matters more than anyone here tells you. She didn't smile exactly, but her shoulders dropped slightly. Hope doesn't come loud. Sometimes it just sighs. We talked about systems theory, about team culture, about the gaps between resumes and reality. She asked good questions, better ones than I had asked when I first sat in that same chair years ago, being told I was kind and nothing else. When she left, she smiled in that way only people do when they're not fully sure they're allowed to believe in themselves yet. And that's when I knew. It wasn't about Aubrey anymore. It never really had been. It was about all the rooms we let others keep us out of. All the places we were told we had to earn. All the chairs we were never offered, so we built our own and sat down anyway. I glanced at the board one last time. The torn test packet fluttered in the air from the vent. It looked like history, no longer failure, just firewood. Before I left that night, I took one last thing out of my bag. A napkin, old, wrinkled, faded. It had once been stuffed in my coat pocket after a failed pitch meeting back in 2020. I had written something on it in pen that was nearly dried out. Something I wasn't sure I believed at the time. No one sees the quiet builder until the building outlasts the storm. I pinned it above the resume, 2 truths side by side. Then I turned off the desk lamp. The room dimmed into a soft, golden hush, the kind of light that forgives sharp corners. the kind that feels like a beginning. Outside, Minneapolis pulsed with quiet movement. Cars hummed. Someone shouted across the street. A bus exhaled at the corner. And I walked out, not faster, not slower, just steady, like someone who finally understood that strength doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it's the refusal to go cold.